Welcome to the IllumiNewsroom.
The guessing games are over, at least until the next set. Lorcana released their official app this morning, and with it the remaining cards. There are a lot of them, so let's get into them. First, there was still a whole bunch of vanilla characters left. Mr. Smee, Loyal First Mate, Pumbaa, Friendly Warthog, Tamatoa, Drab Little Crab, Captain, Colonel's Lieutenant, Stitch, Abomination, Mufasa, King of the Pride Lands, Aladdin, Cornered Swordsman, and Lilo, Galactic Hero. All of them are stat lines we haven't seen before, and all seem relatively fair, especially Stitch and Mufasa getting 3 lore. We'd seen the art for Aladdin and Lilo, but Pumbaa was my only fully correct guess here. I am a little sad that baby Tamatoa is just Dreamborn and not a villain. Beyond the vanillas, first up is Cinderella, Gentle and Kind. I should have stuck with my guns with my guesses. She's an Amber 2/5/2 lore for 4 with Singer 5, and you can exert her to heal a princess by 3. Seems like an auto-include in a Moana deck, and otherwise has a decent stat line for her cost. I'm most intrigued by this weird will-o-wisp she's looking at. Is that a dream made manifest or something? Or maybe it's just their interpretation of the Sweet Nightingale bubble? The final Amber card is You Have Forgotten Me, a 4-cost action that makes each opponent discard 2 cards. I was not expecting Amber to get forced to discard, but here we are. Honestly, seems pretty decent. You're getting to remove 2 things with 1 card, as we've seen Amber struggles with dealing with characters once they're on the board, and this is a bit of compensation for that, I suppose. Into Amethyst. I guessed correctly that Dr. Facilier would get the last Floodborn. Let's cover the other shift target first. Remarkable Gentleman, a 2/4/1 lore for 3 with whenever you play a song, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, but 1 on top and 1 on the bottom. Same thing we saw on Ursula's Cauldron, except this is a bit more conditional. You'll only run him in decks running lots of songs, or if you really want to run the Floodborn, Agent Provocateur, a 4/5/3 lore for 7 uninkable with shift 5, and whenever one of your other characters is banished in a challenge, you may return them to your hand. So Sorcerer Mickey's ability, but for everyone! This is a fantastic ability, giving Amethyst a ridiculous amount of card advantage. This makes you feel less bad about exposing Zeus to a challenge, because if he's knocked out, you can just replay him next turn. We've seen the art for her, and now we can finally see all of the Queen, Wicked and Vain, an Amethyst 4/5/1 lore for 5 who can exert to draw a card. Fantastic! So simple yet intensely powerful. If you can hide her behind bodyguards, you will have a ridiculous amount of card draw in any game using her. Rounding out the Amethyst characters is our other legendary, Ursula Power Hungry, a 2/8/3 lore for 7 uninkable wolf, with when you play her, each opponent loses 1 lore, and for each lore lost, you draw a card. I think this is the first truly multiplayer-focused card we've seen. She'll be a playable in 1v1 games, as it's still not a bad effect even if you only draw 1, but she will be a must-have in any game with at least 3 players, becoming a better Surfer Stitch. The only trick will be getting to 7 without being able to ink any Ursulas. And exactly what I thought it would be, Freeze, an Amethyst action for 2 uninkable that exerts a character. This is going to be very useful, especially in any deck with challenge triggers. I would probably run this over Elsa Snow Queen in my Amethyst Steel deck, just because you don't have to wait a turn to exert, and it's not competing with Tiny Tactician on the price point. It also doesn't telegraph what you want to do. Once you put Snow Queen on the board, it's kind of obvious what you're trying. Heading into Emerald, exactly as I predicted, Floodborn Genie, Powers Unleashed, a 3/5/3 lore for 8 uninkable, shift 6, with evasive, and whenever he quests, you may play an action with cost 5 or less for free. This is utterly ridiculous. You can shift him out turn 6, quest for 3, he's evasive, and then you can Dragonfire or let it go on top of that. He may only be rare, but he will be a chase card for sure. Instead of Madam Mim, we do in fact get Mad Hatter without the March Hare. He's an Emerald 2/4/3 lore for 5 with whenever he's challenged, you may draw a card. Very nice, and I think he'll see play in a lot of Emerald decks. So we only get 1 Peter Pan, but we do get 4 Tinker's Bell. Most helpful is a 2/3/2 lore for 4 with evasive, and when you play her, give someone else evasive. She's just strictly better Pongo at the same rarity. Man, Ruby's just getting shafted. Although in an Emerald Ruby deck, you can give Mulan or Heroic Outlaw evasive, which is very, very nice. Pick off those evasives that are trying to avoid you. Then there's what I think might be my favorite action of this entire set, Steal from the Rich for 5 uninkable. Whenever one of your characters quests this turn, each opponent loses a lore. This is insane, and I love it. Build up your board full of evasives, drop this on turn 5, set your opponent back a bunch. The one drawback is since it costs 5, you can't really keep building your own board the turn you play this. It might be better used as a catch-up tool. Your opponent has the lore to win on their next turn, and you can either challenge them or quest out and steal from them. Or just play this for free with Genie. The final Emerald card is an item, Dr. Facilier's cards. For 2 uninkable, you can exert to pay 1 less for your next action this turn. Basically Emerald's Lantern. Very solid and encouraging you to play an action-focused deck. Pairs particularly well with Steal from the Rich. Going into Ruby, we have Maui, Hero to All, a 6/5/0 lore for 5 with Rush and Reckless. It's better Gaston! He's basically a Dragonfire that can hit more than once, provided there's an exerted target. And he's inkable! I'm pretty sure this is the only inkable Rush card, probably because he's reckless. Sticking to the same movie is Moana, Chosen by the Ocean, a 2/6/2 lore for 5 with when you play her, you may banish a Te Ka. We'll get into the Te Kas soon, but this seems very niche. Her stat line is worse than Jumbajukuba. I would only really play her in draft, or if a Ruby Princess deck turns out to be amazing. Turns out there is a second Peter Pan. Fearless Fighter is a 3/2/1 lore for 3 uninkable with Rush. Once again, Ruby just putting out strictly worse cards. This is just weaker Rafiki. He does benefit from Tinkerbell Peter Pan's ally, but that's still a stretch. Next. Here's Te Ka, the Burning One, an 8/6/0 lore for 6 uninkable with Reckless. Well, she can take out anything other than Triton and probably survive. I just don't know if she really needs to be uninkable, especially after seeing Maui. Maybe playtesting will show she's somehow a powerhouse, but for 6 ink, especially uninkable, I either expect an immediate impact or a lot of lore. The final Ruby card is Shield of Virtue, an item for 1 ink with Exert, pay 3 ink, ready chosen character, they can't quest. This ain't bad. Very good with any character with a challenge trigger because it's reusable. Fan the Flames is already good, and while using this is more expensive, you don't use up the card to do so. I like it, especially since it's inkable. Getting into Sapphire, here's Chief Tui, Respected Leader, a 3/6/3 lore for 7 with support. Solid! I like this much better than Triton at this cost. Gimme that lore! Next is his mom, Grammatala, Storyteller, a 1/1/1 lore for 2 with when she's banished, you may put her into your inkwell. I love this. This is going to be fantastic in ramp decks, particularly topped by Belle. Her stats are not at all threatening, but 1 lore per turn can add up, so your opponent will eventually have to deal with her, and whether that's with a challenge or a grab your sword, they just added to your inkwell. You can also use her as a ping too, a 4 of in any ramp deck. Here comes Hades, Infernal Schemer, a 3/6/2 lore for 7 uninkable with when you play him, you may ink an opposing character. Fantastic! Sapphire's Monstrous Dragon. I love how they specify opposing so you can't use him to ramp yourself. Very fitting with Sapphire's other legendary and another 4 of in any ramp deck, this time as a payload. Philoctetes, Trainer of Heroes, is a 3/1/1 lore for 2 with support. Honestly not bad at all, even though he'll likely die after his first use. Getting to throw 3 strength onto someone else will be very nice. Probably best to hide him behind a bodyguard, and good thing Hercules is right there. This time he's actually a villain. It's Tamatoa, So Shiny. He's a 5/8/1 lore for 8 with when he's played or quests, you may return an item from your discard to your hand. And he gets +1 lore for each item you have in play. This is wild. I would say he's the perfect capstone to an item deck, but he does cost a lot. I suppose he'd be an auto-include in an Amber Sapphire deck since you can use lanterns. With 2 lanterns out, he costs effectively 6 and makes 3 lore, which is insane. A build-around character, though the build will probably take some thinking and tinkering. Speaking of items, we finally get to see the remaining ones in Sapphire. First up is Eye of the Fates at 4 ink, which you can exert to give a character +1 lore pip for a turn. A very interesting choice. Do you play this on turn 4 and give an extra lore to a character questing, or do you play a character to get more lore on the board in the long run? I love any card that forces you to think. However, there's no thought at all that this goes into an Ariel Who's a Collector deck because this just becomes ridiculous. Next, it's the Fishbone Quill at 3 ink, which you can exert to put a card from your hand into your inkwell. Any card, even uninkable, and it isn't exerted. Auto-include in any Belle or Tamatoa deck, and a high recommendation when paired with Amethyst to get extra draw. Even in Steel, this can help you meet the condition to use Beast's Mirror. The final Sapphire card is Magic Golden Flower, a 1-cost item you can banish to heal a character for 3. This is just strictly better than Healing Glow, especially with the item recursion Sapphire gets. Not necessarily an auto-include, as Healing Glow is already pretty weak, but probably a 4 of in an Ariel deck. She can challenge, you play this and both ready and heal her. This can also be pre-played, you don't have to immediately use it. We're in the home stretch with one color left. As expected, we have Donald Duck Musketeer, a 2/5/1 lore for 4 with Bodyguard, and during your turn, your Musketeers are evasive. So it's pretty clear that in the Amber Steel Musketeer deck, you drop Donald turn 4, then turn 5 you swing him into an evasive and play Goofy to heal him. This could be a solid package, the only downside being you have to wait until turn 4 to start getting out your Musketeers. Hopefully subsequent sets unveil some cheaper ones. Next is Simba Rightful Heir, a Steel 3/5/2 lore for 5 uninkable with when you challenge and banish with him, you gain 1 lore. So not quite as good as Heroic Outlaw, but still a nice way to gain lore and Steel. However, his being uninkable will make him compete with Steel's removal tools for inclusion in a deck. I do like that all 4 Simbas we've seen are basically his entire progression to the movie. That's pretty neat. A character I didn't expect at all, Starkey Hook's Henchman is a 5/4/1 lore for 5 with while you have a captain in play, he gets +1 lore pip. So in Steel alone, you have 3 Captain's Hook along with Gontu. In the kind of deck you'd play him in, he's about on par with Jumba Jukaba, but you'd probably only play him in a deck with lots of captains. The other Steel legendary is Tay Ka Heartless, a 5/5/2 lore for 6 with whenever she challenges and banishes, gain 2 lore. Much better than the new Simba, and I would honestly put this into any Steel deck. Whether she quests or challenges, you get 2 lore. I am curious if we'll see Tefiti as a separate character later on. The final card, 204 out of 204, is Plasma Blaster, a Steel item for 3, uninkable, which you can exert and pay to ink to deal 1 damage to a character. Pretty solid, letting you efficiently deal with Pascal's and biding her times. And that's the whole set! Release is coming soon, and I can't wait to get my hands on the actual cards. I have a bunch more videos I have ideas for, but for now, I think I'm going to curl into a comfy chair and have a little nap.